Welcome to The Liberating Secret with your host, author and teacher, Sylvia Pierce. The Liberating Secret is dedicated to revealing the mystery of the gospel, which is Christ in you, the only hope of glory. Let's join Sylvia Pierce for today's lesson.
So we're looking at Hebrews this week, and I don't know who wrote Hebrews. I don't argue with suggestions or assertions about that. I would like to make a quick comparison, say, to Romans or Galatians. We know that there's the Roman road for salvation, and Galatians, is the charter of Christian liberty. Hebrews, as Sylvia said last night, is a difficult book. But there's a great benefit in reading difficult books, even if you only get a sliver now and then. And you can grow with a book. The Lord can grow you with a book. There are at least a couple levels I'd like to comment on to the book. Sylvia mentioned last night that one of the reasons that it was written was that there were people going back to Judaism and even, going back under the law and to animal sacrifices. And Christians might think, well, what does that have to do with me? I never was a Jew, so I'm not going to go back to being a Jew. And of course, I know that animal sacrifices are over. But that's one level. It's a very important level. And then another level is that it's a very intricate book. It's probably more intricate than your phone, really. And we have, sometimes we have an aversion to intricate things. We like to use them. Like, I like to turn a light on, but I don't know anything about electricity. Scott Pierce knows everything about electricity. I mean, like, he can wire your house. He understands how it works. You have to have a lot of training to do that so you don't kill yourself and others. And so you can get you can get slivers from Hebrews, or you can get into the intricacies of it. And sometimes we might ask, well, why is a book like Hebrews so complicated? And we might say, why not? Your phone is complicated. A space shuttle is complicated. The baseball game you may have watched yesterday is complicated. All the skills and training that... Thanks. So, studying Hebrews is, in some ways, like a scientist studying the universe. You just never run out. And another thing about Hebrews is it quotes the Old Testament a lot. But let's think, if you were trying to win Jews or Jewish people to Jesus Christ, it'd be a good idea to use their own book. See, in other words, a lot of us, when we became Christians basically through the New Testament. And we may not have known much of anything about the Old Testament. I mean, you invite Christ into your life, you receive the Holy Spirit. Wow, you begin to experience life and transformation. And you might think, wow, that Old Testament it's a big old heavy book, and a lot of it's hard to understand, and we're not under the old covenant anyway. But wait a minute. Really, in the Old Testament, there were two things going on. One of them began with the promise to Adam and Eve at the fall, because the promise of the Messiah came right away after the fall. And that promise runs through the whole Old Testament. And God gave a promise to Abraham, and Abraham believed that promise, and it was reckoned to him as righteous. And so all through the Old Testament is a stream of faith. That never goes away. That's never superseded. That never changes. Because the nature of God and His promises never ever change. Nothing ever changes that. And it's always true that if God makes you a promise and you believe it, it's reckoned to you as righteousness. You actually are righteous then. So to say, well, we've got the New Testament, so we don't the Old Testament as if it's all a book of law. It is not all a book of law. It is not. And Paul says in Galatians that the law, meaning the Mosaic law, given 430 years after the promise to Abraham, didn't nullify the promise. So Hebrews is a book that has a lot of Old Testament in it. Not because it's Mosaic law, but because there is a lot of promise in it and a lot of looking forward to the new covenant. Because from the promise that was made to Adam and Eve onward, the way of salvation was to believe the promises of God. And the pictures in the Old Testament, like the birth of Isaac, which is supernatural. I mean, Abraham and Sarah did have relations, and Isaac was born, but it was supernatural because it was humanly impossible. It's a miracle birth. It's a picture of the new man, the new creation. So, and the Jewish people in Israel never go away. There's some thinking in the church, really a lot of it probably, that Israel goes away and then there's the church and then Israel comes back. You know, like the church is raptured and then God deals with Israel again, as if the church and Israel are separate entities. Well, God is going to deal with Israel again. But the real truth is, and you get this from Romans 11, that when you become a Christian, you are grafted into the original vine, which is the patriarchs. The patriarchs being Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the church actually is grafted into the original vine of the patriarchs. So how can the church in Israel be separate entities if we're grafted into them? They didn't come to an end and the church start, and then the church is raptured away, and then Israel starts, and they're two different things. We are one with every Jew, with every Israelite, with every one of them that ever believed the promises of God and was reckoned as righteous. We of the church are one with them. We were grafted into them. The new covenant was given through Jeremiah, and it's quoted later in Hebrews. So the fact that it's quoted in Hebrews is not quoted for the first time in the Bible. It came through Jeremiah. So Hebrews is weaving together the people of God of all time from the Bible and from faith. And to understand that is to make peace with Hebrews and begin to dig into it and not see it as some separate thing of just trying to keep Jewish people back then from going back to Judaism. Our connection to Abraham is as real as it can be. Abraham is our father of faith. Doesn't matter that if you're not a Jew and Abraham was, he's your father of faith when you believe. So you're one with the stream of faith that began with the promise and went forward. Now, in getting ready for doing this, if one can ever really get ready, you get ready if the Spirit leads you, and then you're ready when the Spirit flips the switch. Other than that, you're just kind of powerless and helpless like you always are. So I'm not a spiritual person, actually. I have a great spirit in me, the Holy Spirit, but I'm not a spiritual person. So no one's really a spiritual person. It's what spirit is in you. If you're the old man, you have the spirit of Satan in you. If you're the new man, you have the spirit of Christ in you. And no one's walking around without an operating spirit in them. Everyone's a slave to one or the other, slave to sin or slave to righteousness. See, that's what folks don't like. That's why I always say God gives us a multiple choice question. Do you want to be a slave of A, Satan, or B, Christ? And for years I had a write-in answer, C, be my own boss. And that is, no, there's no C option. You pick A or B. Well, I don't want to pick A or B. Well, it's too bad. I'm God and you're not. Well, I wasn't sure he was God and I was not until 25 years ago. Then I was really sure. Because when you really hit bottom and you really crash, then you really know you're not God. 25 years ago, I woke up one morning and I thought, gosh, I'm so glad I'm not God. And I thought, wait a minute, what am I saying? Because that means on some level I had thought that. And I thought, that's absurd. I mean, as a Christian and academically, I mean, I knew that. But I obviously hadn't really known it all the way down, drilling down all the way into the core. All right, so Richard quoted Hebrews 3:1 last night. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling. So Hebrews will hit some high notes and then give some warnings. In other words, it'll put out something so truly wonderful and sometimes very brief that you could easily read over it. And then there'll be a longer stream of warnings. And why the warnings? See, if you just, when I was uninformed and ignorant about Hebrews, and I'd read through Hebrews, I thought it's a book of warnings. It's a scary book. It's one of the scariest things I've ever read. But the point is, the wonderful things are there. The promises are there. And the warnings are about not believing the promises. The warnings aren't about, here's God's commandment, now you have to go keep it, and you're in trouble if you don't. It's not that. It works like this. God tells you things so wonderful that you can hardly begin to even grasp how wonderful they are. Just the most amazing news you could ever hear. Out of the goodness and mercy and overflowing heart of God, the sacrifice of God, His Son, His promises of eternal life and a new body someday in a new world, and who we are now with Christ living in us. And then the warnings are, if you don't take that, you're in deep, deep trouble not because God is self resentful toward you. That's not what His wrath is, but because you're hurting yourself. You're living in death. You're not giving up death and exchanging it for life. And so Hebrews 3 begins with, therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. And so one thing that's saying is that I'm not the apostle and the high priest of our confession. I mean, you can be an apostle and you can be a priest, but you can't be the apostle and the high priest of our confession. It had to start somewhere. That's why in Colossians it says he was the firstborn from the dead. That doesn't mean he was the first person resurrected from the dead in the Bible. There were people in the Bible that came out of the grave, but they came out and were physically like they were before. They were still of the same order, the same species, we might say, still mortal in a mortal body. But when Jesus rose from the dead, he came out into an immortal body. He came out as the first one of its kind, the first new man, glorified man. So it's not just that Jesus was raised from the dead like other people in the Bible were raised from the dead. He was raised from the dead in glory. He's the glory, new creation man. So he's the first of that order. So he's got to be the high priest. He's got to be the apostle and the high priest of that. And when we believed and became his body, then he can call us to be apostles and priests of the body of the one who is the apostle and the high priest. So this verse is telling us two things, telling us who he is and who we're not, so that we can see who we really are, because we're not anything apart from the head. We're not anything apart from being joined to him. You can't have Christ over here and the body over here trying to be like Christ. That makes no sense at all. And I like that so much I'm going to say it again. You can't have Christ as the head over here and the body over here trying to be like Christ. They're one. That's what the Bible is screaming at us. And sometimes you have to scream. You have to scream at who? You have to scream at children sometimes. It doesn't mean you hate them. It means you love them. I mean, if you're screaming at them for them to be who they are. So he was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. Now, so Moses was faithful in his house, and Christ was faithful over the house, whose house we are. He built the house. Now, it's interesting where it talks about that Moses was faithful in his house. And it comes from Numbers chapter 12, where it says, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, you three come out to the tent of meeting. So the three of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent. And he called Aaron and Miriam. When they had both come forward, he said, hear now my words. If there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? What's going on there? So Moses is in the house and he's being faithful. But part of that text is not only that Moses was faithful in his house, which he was. Now, Moses had married a Cushite woman, which Cushite can, if you look it up, is Ethiopian. She was a foreigner then. And Moses had, we know that Moses, there's a debate whether this is Zipporah or a new wife. Whether his first wife, Zipporah, wasn't Jewish and either. So we might say, well, gosh, isn't Moses being unequally yoked? You know, why didn't he marry a Jewess? Well, there wasn't any, he wasn't unequally yoked because there wasn't any such thing then. There were no laws. Joseph married an Egyptian woman, and look, Joseph's career turned out pretty well. So it really wasn't anybody's business. There wasn't any law against Moses marrying a Cushite woman. Now, it was about this time that Moses had been overworked. And his father-in-law, Jethro, came to him and said, Moses, you're overworked. And Moses said, oh, people coming day and night. I wanted to be a counselor, and then when I became a counselor, I didn't want to be a counselor anymore. So Jethro said, you know what you need to do? You need to have 70 elders, and the Spirit will come on them, and they'll take a lot of your caseload. So somehow in this stream of events, Aaron and Miriam became jealous, and Miriam became the spokesperson for the jealousy. And it may be, probably was, that before it was Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Miriam is Moses' sister. And so it's like, I think Aaron was related to him too, wasn't he? So you got a family, a little family nucleus of 3 people, and they're basically running things, if you want to see it like that. And suddenly you bring in 70 new people, and it's probably taking a lot of Moses' time and energy, and Miriam and Aaron are thinking, boy, we used to have a third of the pie or here, and now we're having to divide everything up with 70 other people, and Moses isn't paying us as much attention anymore. Oh my gosh, there can't be grumbling in the church, can there? That doesn't happen, does it? But the Lord, how does the Lord validate this? He comes down, he says, listen, Miriam and Aaron, when I want to talk to Moses, I don't even need to give him a dream or a vision. I just come down and appear to him and talk mouth to mouth with him. Can you top that? And so he was going to discipline Miriam a lot more severely, and Moses cried out for that not to be, and the Lord had mercy on Miriam and made it a light, much lighter chastisement, much, much lighter. But the point about Moses is not who had power or who was running things or who was calling the shots, but who was talking to Moses. Who was talking to Moses, the Lord, and who was hearing the Lord, Moses. That's the real point. The Lord's saying, if Moses was in some kind of trouble with what he's doing, this Cushite wife thing you're bothered about or anything else, I'd be all over him. And I might not even talk to him. I might not talk to him, or I might not give him a dream or a vision, but I keep validating him. And you need to pay attention to that. See, this helps me a lot with the people of God that I encounter. Because other Christians say a lot of things and I think, huh? Like, I don't know if that's right or not, or like, you're doing that? I mean, there's no clear-cut sin, but you're doing that? Or I feel irritated by something about another person, or I guess there's some habit that's disturbing, or I just don't like them. And then I think, wait a minute, that person's a Christian. Christ lives in that person. That's the first thing I want to pay attention to. And then people who are walking in the Spirit, they have Christ in them, and they're actually walking in the Spirit, and you see the evidence of a supernatural life, I think, I better be careful. Because if I touch that person in the wrong way with something I think or say or do, I'm not sure that I'm not touching the Lord in a way that He wouldn't like. Kind of like He might say to me, you leave that person alone. Don't you see the evidence in that person's life? I'll let you know if there's something I want you to bring up with that person. Otherwise, you just see through and let it go. If there's something really wrong, it'll get wronger and wronger and wronger, and then it'll get ugly, and then you really will know. Right. But it'll expose itself. Thank you, Jenny. And if nothing exposes itself, and the person just goes along and has this habit or this thing that's irritating or you don't like, whatever, hey, see through. See through to Christ. Set your mind on things above and not on the things of the earth. Earth is this stuff. Things above is the inner person. The inner person of you is above. But in this body, and I pretty much addressed that point. I just like repeating things. I don't want to take all morning repeating. All right. So Christ was faithful as a son over His house if we hold fast our confidence and boast of our hope firm to the end. And that verse used to scare me, verse 6. Oh my gosh. I just want to believe once saved, always saved. You know, I grew up a Baptist. And so you go down, you make your profession of faith, you know, you invited Christ in your life, and you're good till you die, right? Not necessarily. Maybe, who knows? I mean, you plant something in the ground, it's got to stay in the ground. It's got to germinate. It's got to be watered. It's got to want to be what it is. So somebody that makes a profession of faith and then changes their mind and never comes back to Christ says, you know what? I went to church, I accepted Christ, but I really hadn't thought it through. It's really not what I believe, what I want. I don't want that. I don't want to be a Christian. I don't call myself a Christian. Hey, I'll tell you how free God is. You want to be lost? You want to change your mind? Change your mind. You want to be lost? Be lost. You get in the end what you want. If you want Christ, you get Christ. If you absolutely make up your mind you don't want Christ, He won't force Himself on you. It doesn't mean you have to go around living in fear. The people afraid of losing their salvations are the least likely people to lose it because they don't really want to lose it. They need assurance. They need a review of the promises. He will never leave you or forsake you. He's faithful. He who began a good work in you. I was really messed up and in a dark place early on when I was in the Navy back in the early 70s. I had gotten away from I'd been filled with the Holy Spirit and a Bible reader, and I just let that slip, and I did what the Hebrew says not to do. I drifted. And I drifted into just living like Paul says to the Corinthians, you're carnal. You think you're a mere man. Don't touch that. You think you're a mere man. So then one day I realized, my light's gone out, and what's going on? So I wrote a Bible professor that I had, and he was a famous Bible professor, and I thought he probably wouldn't even read my letter if I wrote it, and much less answer it. But he did read it, and he did write me a letter. He typed this letter, and it was just, and signed it. It was one page, but hey. And he quoted Philippians 1:6, "He who began a good work in you will complete it unto the day of Jesus Christ." And I thought, thank you, thank you, thank you. I had heard from God, and I'd heard from God through this professor. If I don't hold fast this cup, what's it going to do? Come on, folks. Yeah, right. We can't be stupid about the faith. You can't play it both ways. Say, I went to church and I became a Christian supposedly when I was at a certain age, maybe young, and now I don't want to be, but I'm going to play it both ways. That I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Christian. What? You can't be not a Christian but a Christian, or a Christian but not a Christian. You can only be one thing. Purity. I love this saying of Soren Kierkegaard. Purity of heart is to will one thing. That's why Jesus said, single eye. And James says, don't be double-minded. The Lord knows what your singleness is. And He cultivates that. And so in the end, everything divides out. There are the people that were single for the Lord, and single-minded for the Lord, and the people that were double-minded, which is really single-minded, eventually, for the devil. Does any of this bother? I hope that people get bothered by some of this because you're stirring up fear. No. What you take takes you. You can't be taken by what you don't take. If I pour you a cup of coffee and you never drink it, I poured you a nice cup of coffee, but you didn't really drink it. Receiving, that's what vessels do, receive. All right, so why all this kind of fearful, hesitant talk? In Hebrews, it makes it such a scary letter. Why are we doing it? Because the news is so incredible, and the only way anybody gets in trouble is by not believing it. I'm on safe ground here because I'm just going through this verse by verse. I didn't make this stuff up. I rode on an airplane one time, and I witnessed to the lady next to me, and she's like, "Who do you think you are?" I said, "I didn't make that. I'm just quoting Bible verses, lady, man. I didn't make this plan up. I would have never thought of this. This is not my idea." All right, now, here's an incredible thing in verse 7, the last part of verse 7. And he quotes from the 95th Psalm. "Today, if you hear His voice." Now, it's easy to read over that, and I confess I've read over that many times. But a few days ago, 2-3 days ago, looking at this chapter, that verse blew me away. Today, if you hear His voice. Because when I crashed and then the Lord restored me, the most wonderful thing about it was I heard His voice again. I thought, oh my gosh, God is talking to me again. He probably was talking the whole time, and I was like, me, my problems, my obsessions, all sin consciousness, craziness. few psychiatric hospitals in there, one suicide attempt. And then, but I didn't really, one person said to me, oh, if you really wanted to kill yourself, you'd have done it. You wouldn't have just taken some pills. And I thought about that. That's right. Because if you aim a gun and you go pow, that's it. You take some pills, you can do, like I took the pills, and I was sitting waiting, and the Lord talked to me then. He said, I was in a motel operated by Christians, and the Lord said, go tell Pat May, she was the manager of the lead, go tell her what you just did. Well, I had a choice there. I could say, heck no, I'm not going to tell anybody I just took all those pills, sleeping pills. Well, I thought, well, that's pretty clear. You might think, why did the Lord let you take the pills and then say, go tell somebody? He knows his business, right? I mean, I'm not justifying taking the pills, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But the Lord said, go tell Pat May. So when I told her, obviously I survived. So, which was a good thing. I was kind of ambivalent about it for a while. But the Lord restored me, and the most wonderful thing was I heard his voice. And one of the most wonderful verses in all the Bible to me became where Jesus says in John 10, my sheep hear my voice. And you know what? From then on, for the last 25 years, I've lived hearing that voice. I don't hear it every second like, Brian, go shave, Brian, go brush your teeth, Brian, do this, that, and the other. But I hear his voice and I'm aware of the Lord. It's a whole different consciousness. See, really up to that point, I was a Christian, but I still had a sin consciousness. I lived more like, I don't really have it. I don't really know it. I teach this high stuff, but I don't really have it locked in. Something could go wrong. But when I started hearing his voice 25 years ago, after that crash, I thought it was a whole new thing, a whole new consciousness, and a whole new way of living that I'd heard, but I had never really heard for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, the deal is not on me, Lord, it's on you. And I mean, I'd heard that a zillion times. I mean, my friend Bill Bauer used to say all the time, hey, bro, the heat's on God. And I think, oh, that's incredible, Bill. I think Bill works for you. But I can't really say that for myself. I love it when you say it, but I can't really say it for myself. When I started hearing his voice 25 years ago, I could say it for myself. I've been saying it ever since. The Lord is my shepherd. You know that the Lord is my shepherd means he's your keeper. You're not keeping yourself. He's keeping you. Now, I minister in a jail with Louis over there. Louis and so all of us, the people in jail, we have a group of violent offenders. I mean, they're people you read about in the newspaper. I mean, they've done that. Why they're in the unit they're in is because they can't mix with the other units because they're violent offenders. Their crimes are heinous. I was telling them, I said, there's no sin I wouldn't do if God weren't keeping me. And if there's any sin I haven't committed, it's just because I didn't get to it yet before I came into the keeping, discovered the keeping. So I don't have to look at somebody and think, oh, I would never molest that child, or I would have never taken a tomahawk and scalped that person, or I never would have shot that person. I had a student of mine. I taught 1 year of high school and 14 years of college. The year I taught high school, I had a very quiet young man, and a few years ago, he put 40 slugs into his best friend. And I thought, I didn't think, how could you do that? I mean, I marveled at it, but I thought, I could do that if the Lord weren't keeping me. How can I say I wouldn't do this or that? I've done plenty of things in my life I thought I'd never do. So I'm like, oh, how could you do that? Doesn't mean I agree with it or that it's not sin. It means, why do we not, what is the one and only reason why a person doesn't sin? It's because Jesus Christ is walking around in them, not sinning, and they're receiving that by faith and living in the Spirit that way. Otherwise, they'd be doing all kinds of stuff overtly or secretly. And secrets have a way of becoming not secrets, right? All right. Today, if you hear His voice, yes! So wonderful. And that comes from Psalm 95. And these warnings that follow here come from Psalm 95. But let's hear the first part of Psalm 95. Oh, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to Him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are His also. The sea is His, for it was He who made it, and His hands formed the dry land. Let us come worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture, and the sheep of His hand. How does it get better than that? How does it get better than that? That's the long version of Hebrews 3:1 that said, Holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus. That's Psalm 95 is the long version of the good news. You might say, well, why didn't Hebrews have the long version of the good news as well as the long version of the bad news? Because in Psalm 95, about half the psalm is what I just read you, and the other half are the warnings we see here in Hebrews 3. Because the writer, sometimes writers in Scripture have expectation of go back and read the source. You know, for years, one thing I like about the New American Standard Bible, and I'm not pitching it above others, I'm just saying is one thing I like about it, is the Old Testament quotes are in all caps. And so it immediately alerts me, Old Testament quote. And so here in Hebrews 3, from here down to here, it's in all caps. And so I used to think, Old Testament, read over that. Doesn't apply. Doesn't apply? Well, so I took a lot of trouble to write that out and include it in the letter. And so I'm warning you about turning back from the promises. I'm warning you, and if you wonder what the promises are, go back and read what the promises were that come before the warning. Now, you know, if you're a parent and your child's about to turn the stove on and put the hand in the fire, you don't stand there and say, you know, Johnny, if you use the fire right, you can pop popcorn, you can fry eggs, you can make what is that? You take bread and soak it, and egg and batter and French toast. You can make French toast. It's unbelievable, Johnny, what you can do on this stove. It's incredibly wonderful. Johnny, no, you get right there. Don't do that. And so he's on to the don't do that here. But you can see from Psalm 95 that you get the wonderfulness before you get the warning. All right. So today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness, when your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways, and I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Scary, scary, scary sounding, right? So how did they test him in the wilderness? Well, Psalm 95 brings up Massah and Meribah, where there wasn't any water. It's Exodus 17. And they had just come out and passed through the sea into the wilderness, and there wasn't water, and they grumbled. And so the point in Psalm 95 is grumbling never gets you anywhere. Complaining never gets you anywhere. You can feel as negative as you want. You can hate inconvenient and bad stuff as much as you want. You just can't grumble about it and stay there. I'm very negative about lots of things in a moment. Sometimes it hangs on a little longer, and then at a certain point, the Lord says, time to come up over this. Start seeing the brighter side. Ask me what I'm doing. Start get that faith muscle working. What do you want out of this? What do you want to see me do out of this? What are you believing me for? What have I done? What have I done great for you before? So if you had a terrible time and I did something great for you. You had a terrible time, I did something great for you. You're having a terrible time. Do you believe I'm going to do something great for you? Is that going to be something great not just for you, but for others? That I'm going to use you for others. But it has to start with going through something terrible, some kind of privation or affliction or trial or tribulation, which is, James tells us, is perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal to be tempted and have terrible feelings and horrible thoughts and impulses and urges, which the Lord doesn't mean for you to act on, but He doesn't mean for you to take condemnation for it. How could I have had that thought cross my mind? I must be still have the wicked heart that Jeremiah talks about. Lord, why am I going through this affliction? Must be something wrong with me or my faith. No, it's not that. It's who God is, who's got you going through it, and what He's going to do. So, Massah and Meribah, they're mentioned in Psalm 95, and the text behind that is Exodus 17, and basically those words mean grumbling and arguing. Grumbling and arguing how? With the Lord, because if we grumble and argue, we're not arguing with other people or with circumstances. We're really saying, God, why did you let it be like this? One day, it's while I was still teaching English at our local college, I had a night class, and so sometimes I'd go to Captain D's and have something to eat before the class. And so I was kind of on the negative side with things. As I was sitting there, ready to take a bite of fish, the Lord said, I'm sorry, Brian, that the world isn't going the way you want it to. I thought, what? Well, see, Richard read Psalm 139. I know you before and after. I know every thought. I know what's... And I was like, I said, that's right, Lord. Checkmate. I get it. And it was just such a beautiful way that the Lord does. You know, when the Lord talks to you and you're His friend, He can tease you, kid you. There's so many ways He can correct you that actually blow your mind, that you think they're fun, they're comical. Sometimes they're very firm and strict. I got a correction yesterday, and I had no idea. I mean, I thought, whoa. And my reflex reply was, yes, Father. I never say yes, Father, like that. I was saying yes, Father. So I thought, Father. Father connotes a lot of things, and the tone of this was, get on with it. See? Sometimes your mother will comfort you. Sometimes your wife might scold you. The Lord, the Father might just say, don't, this is it. I'm not, non-negotiable. Move. Therefore, and they saw my work for 40 years. What was that? That was the spies went out and came back. We can't go in there. They're too big. They're too mean. It's too hard. it, do it. And they wouldn't be, see, the problem wasn't that they even felt that way or said that. It's they wouldn't change their minds. Moses and Joshua pleaded with them. Or Moses and Caleb, I forget. Joshua and Caleb pleaded with them. They wouldn't change their mind. Sylvia says faith is the second look. So you can start out with some unbelief, but you can't stay there. See, it's not you're not really a sin until you put your seal on that unbelief. You pull that way. When I was first around Norman Grubb, I thought, oh my gosh. I really wasn't much into Christ in you. A little bit. I just was getting my feet wet a little bit. And so Norman was getting ready to talk, and first thing he said, he was old, like up in his 80s. He said, I never start in faith. And I thought, what? You never start in faith? He was a famous missionary. He'd written a gazillion books. I thought, how can you say that? That's wrong. Why am I sitting here listening to you? You say, I never start in faith. That's what he said, folks. I'm going to tell you, he sat there for a few minutes not starting in faith and just waiting, and then I'm going to tell you that the river started flowing. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to drown in all this water. So the spies got in trouble because they would not change their minds. Lots of things come along, we think they're too hard. I don't want to do it, it's too hard, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. I don't have a condemnation consciousness about that. But the Lord goads, pricks, guides, leads, kisses, pats, bring whatever he does in that moment. You change your mind because you don't want his mind not to be your operating mind. You know that the best thing that ever happened to me was I lost my mind. I was afraid of losing my mind, and while I had lost it and hadn't found any other mind, I was in hell. If you lose your mind, and it's the only, you think this is the only mind I've got, and you lose it, and you're in hell, that's pretty bad. But when he showed me a new mind, I thought, this is pretty good. This was worth losing my regular mind, what I thought was my mind for. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really do have the mind of Christ. Woo! Incredible. So I've been kicking it on his mind for the last 25 years. Why should I use my mind? What's my mind compared to his mind? He says my thoughts are past finding out. I could never say that about my thoughts. I would say to people, I acted like my thoughts were past finding out. People found them out right away. We got you, Brian. We catch on to you. But when you have the mind of Christ, people can never totally catch on to you because it's the Lord. They can never totally box you in. They might think they can. They might try to, but they can't do it. Because you could be anything in any moment in the Spirit. There was a guy that wasn't even a Christian I worked with back in 1980. That he was an intriguing person. I don't know whatever happened to him. I hope he became a believer. And I said one day, Wayne, you know me. And he said, Coatney, I could never know you enough. Oh my gosh, this is an unbelieving guy. He must have sensed something in there that I wasn't even really aware of. Sometimes, we're not aware of who's in us, and other people are mystified by it, and we don't half realize it. He might have thought he was talking about my humanity, some mere humanity, but he wasn't. He was talking about divinity. Partakers of the divine nature, as Peter puts it in 2 Peter 1. All right, to make another point or two, and then So he says, I was angry with that generation. I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. 2 comments on that, and then I'm probably done. My mother-in-law used to say, she would quote Norman, the wrath is in man. The wrath is not in God, the wrath is in man. And I would think, the wrath is in God. The Bible talks about God's wrath. The wrath is in God. It's not just in man. She'd say, no, check it out. It's like the sun. If you relate wrongly to the sun in the sky, it burns you. If you relate rightly to it, it blesses you. The sun never changes. It's there. It's wonderful to be for you. But if you relate wrongly to it, it burns you. Okay, that answers a lot about God's wrath. But there's another point about God's wrath, is that when a person, when a person is in wrath, God says, you know what? You don't even get to call that your wrath. You don't even get to call it the devil's wrath. It's my wrath. Even though it's not part of me or anything in me, I've swallowed all that up. There's not one trace, one scintilla, one speck of that in me. The fact that you are relating wrongly and getting burned and tormented, and you have guilt and all kinds of bad stuff, and because you're experiencing wrath because you've refused love, you don't even get to call it yours, because it's my plan. It's not my wrath in that it's not my nature, but it's my wrath because the plan belongs to me. Even hell is mine. It's my hell. I mean, Richard read Psalm 139, if I make my bed in hell, thou art there. So there's no hell in God. But he would say, it's my hell. You don't have a hell of your own. You don't get to do that. Everything is mine. Everything is mine. Whether it has any place in me or who I am or my nature or not, everything is mine, belongs to me. So your hell is really my hell. You don't get to separate yourself from me, even in wrath. Yeah, okay. So that's all. Everything's mine. Which 1 Corinthians says about the Son that, well, let's just look at that and we'll just to read it. I don't want to. It's so wonderful. I don't want to not put it out there in its form. Oh well. No. Here it is. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. 1 Corinthians 15:26, and I'll go on a few verses. For he has put all things in subjection under his feet. All things. That means heaven and hell. All. He's put all things in subjection under his feet. But when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evident that he is accepted who put all things in subjection to him. In other words, the Son is still subject to the Father. That's their agreement. That's their Father-Son agreement. Now listen to this. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself also will be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all in all. No wonder Richard read Psalm 139 this morning. Because God is an all in all God. Everything is His. Everything is accountable to Him. He is the manager over all things. Everything is subject to Him. He is the author of the plan. And it is the wisest possible plan. Ephesians 1 says that. It talks about wisdom in Ephesians 1. And what Paul is saying there is, believe it or not, as terrible as the world is, and whatever is going on in your life, this is God's wisest possible plan. And we would only know that by faith that He has said that, because we never, ever would on our own look at ourselves and around us and think this is the wisest possible plan. We wouldn't even think it was a wise plan. We would think it was a horrible plan. Why are you doing this, God? Why are you letting this happen? This happened. Why? Blah, 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 blah. Why? Wisest possible plan. How do we know that? We only know it the same way we know anything else. We know it by faith.
I hope that you are being blessed by the Liberating Secret. If you would like to have for yourself my books, booklets, or any of my TV or radio series, check out our website's bookstore. Our TV shows are also on our YouTube site. And be sure to get the Liberating Secret app for your phone. We have an annual Louisville conference in June, as well as a biannual Women's Retreat at Pawleys Island, South Carolina. Come for a weekend or a week of study, fun, fellowship by the ocean. We also have a weekly Bible study. See our website for times and location. My husband Scott and I would love to come and share the liberating truth to your fellowship, church, or home group. Please call or contact us through the website. If you would like to donate to our ministry, make your checks out to Christ Our Life Ministries, Post Office Box 43268, Louisville, Kentucky 40253. Please pray for us, and we will pray God's very best for you.